Hi, welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover. I'm Leslie Ann Murray. Today we have Cleyvis Natera of the book Neruda on the Park. Cleyvis Natera was born in the Dominican Republic, migrated to the United States at 10 years old, and grew up in New York City. She holds a BA from Skidmore College and an MFA from New York University. Her writing has won awards and fellowship from PEN America, the Loaf Writers Conference, the Kenyon Review Writers Workshop, and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. She lived with her husband and 2 children in Montclair, New Jersey. Neruda on the Park is her first novel. Cleyvis.
Hi.
Welcome to Brown Girl Book Lover.
Thank you for having me. I am so happy to be with you today. This is such a joyful moment for us. So I'm just so glad we're here because you were there at the very beginning when I first got back into this mess. So I'm glad that we're celebrating like 4 years later.
I just want to say, I adore you. I'm so proud of you and I believe in you. And it's just so nice to see. Like, I love your story and it's so nice to see your personal story and your novel. So I'm just so proud of you. Honestly, I'm so proud of you.
That means so much. It means a lot to hear you say that. Thank you.
Cleyvis, tell us about Neruda on the Park.
So Neruda on the Park is a story. It's a novel about a fictional neighborhood in New York City that is under threat. And it is the threat of gentrification. So at the beginning of the book, we meet a family, a Dominican American family. It's an immigrant family that lives in this neighborhood. And the story is told through the perspectives, primarily through the perspectives of a mother. Her name is Eusebia, and her daughter Luz. And it's really about how each of them confronts the threat of losing their neighborhood. Eusebia, the mother, who until now has been this caretaker and loving matriarch of this community, decides to concoct a scheme where, you know, she's going to ask members of the community to volunteer to like commit crimes and be victims of crimes with the hope that, you know, maybe if they do 1 or 2 little things, you know, these rich white people will want to move into a dangerous neighborhood. Of course, the entire plot spins and spirals out of control. And that's why we have a full book. Meanwhile, her daughter, Luz, who is, you know, this young woman, has graduated from Harvard Law School, is thriving as a professional in the New York City scene, loses her job very early on in the first few pages of the book. And so her journey is really to figure out what is her purpose, what is her home. And she falls in love with the developer of this luxury condo. And so there's just like a lot of tension between these 2 women. It's really juicy. They love each other very fiercely. But for both of them, you know, it's really a journey about community, about love, about belonging, about what it means to, you know, be at home, love your home, do whatever it takes to protect it.
Reading your novel reminded me that the home we as immigrants have left has become an imagination, and we revisit it not as a place, but more as a concept to escape the realities we endure in our adopted home country. Can you talk more about that?
Oh, I love this question. You know, I thought a lot about that because I myself am an immigrant. And so it was just for me like a really interesting revelation that happened when I was fairly young as a writer, to be like, where does this concept of home live? How is it cultivated within our own imaginations the farther we get from it? And at what point does a place stop being home? For me, that happened fairly quickly. Like the United States became my home when I was, you know, a kid. I got here when I was 10. And even though I always longed for the Dominican Republic, I never thought that I would ever go back to live there. You know, it was like, oh, a place that I would visit. So that part for me was really important as I was thinking about these characters, was to show that entire spectrum of the experience these immigrants have toward their birth countries. So it's like this really close-knit community, and Eusebia is absolutely like in love and has a very important place of authority within this community. And so for me, like showing her and showing Luz as this counter narrative to the idea that immigrants are just passing through, that we're just here to make a little bit of money and go back, that in my experience hasn't been the truth. I mean, the majority of immigrants I know have had a real reason why they have left their home, their countries of birth. And even though they love their countries of birth, some do, some don't. The majority of people I know consider the United States their home. There's no question about it. And so for me, it was really important to claim the United States as home to these two women and to just show the different ways in which they show up for that home or
Yeah.
don't, you know?
I think that's really important to do because like, I think when they claim the US as their home, they have a bigger stake in it, right? And they're emotionally connected to it in so many ways. And so like they will fight for it. They're fighting for their community, right? And also I think like that notion of returning home, I think that was, I think when you come here for the first year, you're like, yeah, we're going back home. My mother was the same thing. Yeah, we're going back home. We're going back home. And then like, first grandkid, she's like, this is my home,
Yes.
And now
yes.
she votes, she has such like this important position here, And that's important for everyone to see. We're not just passing through. And when we were thinking about immigrant novel, it's like always like they're like always reflecting home, and home is this nostalgic place and they will return. But I like that they're like, no, this is our home and we're going to fight for it.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I mean, that was definitely the intention in it. And that is one way in which I thought really deeply about how to show that, because it's one of the most critical themes in this book. It's, I really wanted the story to be an American story, because I also want, just in the same ways that I want this American expansion of the American identity to not swallow us whole and make us assimilate in a way where like we're giving everything up, including our language and culture, to fit in. Like, America, do it in the reverse, expand what it means to be American so that all of us can fit into that while, respecting and adhering to our cultures. I think it'll make the place a richer place. But in that same way, I wanted this book to be that, to like break molds about what it means to be a literary novel. And for it, like for people to come into it thinking, oh, another cute immigrant story. But then by the time you get through it, you're like, oh, that was an earthquake. What just happened to me?
I like that. Tell me like 2 takeaways you would want readers to get from reading Neruda on the Park.
Well, I would say first, I really want to create some spaces around this idea of community and what is it that we owe each other. So when I think about community, I think a lot about solidarity, and I think about how, if we kind of get rid of the ways in which we're distracted by pursuing material success, we'll know that it is really through bonding together as communities that we can yield our power and change the situations of our entire communities. I think as long as we're kind of seduced by these ideas of individual exceptionalism, we're going to end up like working in a single lane to get what we want. And it's possible that some of us will get it. But what that means is that the large majority of who we are as Black and Brown communities will not reach well-being. And so, and I'm talking about resources, I'm talking about, our communities, our schools, things like that. So, the book to me is an invitation. I hope people see it as an invitation to really think about community and to think about, how we show up for each other and what we owe each other. And then I would say the second one is just about joy and happiness. Like I really am a big believer that, we can't do any of this work unless we're somehow creating space for play and for pleasure and for joy. And so a lot of what I want people to feel by reading the book and enjoying the book, but also by seeing these two women go through really difficult situations to arrive at a place where I think symbolizes peace and liberation, is that like for both of them, it's like a physical act of like coming to peace with like trauma, or coming to peace with like pleasure, or like accepting a path that is like to honesty. And so, you know, I also hope people get from this book a reminder that just as important as it is to fight to survive, it is just as important that we feel love and joy on the way there.
Yeah, absolutely. Name a writer or an author who is criminally underrated.
Someone who's criminally underrated. That's a really good question. Who do I think is underrated? Well, I guess it depends on like how you mean it, because I think Paul Marshall, who was a writer that I studied with when I was in graduate school, she since passed away. But she was a Caribbean writer, and she wrote somewhere around 10 or 12 novels. I've read most of them.
I love
And she is brilliant. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like her body of work also was doing some really provocative work. And I, not just because she was my teacher in graduate school, but because of her books. And I've read them, you know, since, you know, for 2 decades since then. And I always come to her for so many different reasons. And she was a MacArthur genius, and like, you know, she got some big awards. But you know, I think that part of the reason why Paul Marshall is not well known or well respected is because she wasn't one of these people who like was likable. You know, I think that she was like a very like serious person. I think she didn't pander to like the industry in the way that sometimes we, in the past, maybe more than now, but certainly that there's an expectation. And so I've asked myself a lot, like, why isn't Paul Marshall someone that's studied, that's celebrated in the way that we have like James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, and like, you know, we have a list. And so that to me, I would say if I could like do something about it, it would be her work, because I think it's important, and I think it's part of like an American canon, and nobody even like knows her name. Some of us do, right? Like I'm not surprised you know her. You know, but there's like a group of us, like there's, and it's not as big as it should be. I'm just curious, who would you put on the list? What do you think?
Ooh. Now
Oh yeah, you see, not so easy, huh? Asking the hard questions.
Jamaica Kincaid. If we're going down that, like, I remember I used to stalk Jamaica Kincaid.
Yeah.
I would go to every reading. One time I went to one reading and I was following her out, talking to her. Like,
She was probably like, girl, get away from me. That's so lovely.
Thank you so much for joining me on Brown Girl Book Lover to discuss your book. I appreciate you. I appreciate like just what you bring. I appreciate you that you're putting the Dominican community, Dominican people on the page. Thank you so much for like uplifting us and shining the light on us, and showing our beauty and showing the things that we need to work on. Thank you so much.
Oh, this has been such a pleasure. Seriously. This has been like one of those full circle moments for me, because I remember seeing you in the very first workshop. And then I saw you again at the Brooklyn Caribbean Lit Festival short story reading. And you just have always been so encouraging. And I remember just, this is one of the ways in which New York City is so beautiful, right?
Yeah.
The way in which you can just create community with people and show up for each other. And so being here has been especially joyful and beautiful as a reminder of community. So thank you for that.